Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started, and then people I'm sure will continue to join us. Welcome, everyone. I'm Renee Chatelain. I'm the President and CEO of the Arts Council of Greater Baton Rouge, and I hope that all of you who are attending and those you love are safe and well. And certainly, as we proceed with this webinar, it is our hope that all the information we give you today is helpful to you and to other artists in the region who may not have been able to join today. We hope that you'll share the information as you receive it as well. This is part of our Creative Relief program. And Creative Relief is an avenue for the Arts Council of Greater Baton Rouge to provide resources and really help and assistance to artists during a disaster and just immediately after, following, part of the recovery, also mitigation and planning. So all of those phases are very important to us, and they're important because we value you and our community, and we want our culture, which is so rich here in Louisiana, to be maintained and to grow. Our program was adopted by the state of Louisiana, and so throughout the state, you may see Creative Relief postings. Please, if you are not in our immediate 11 parish region, but you are in this webinar today, reach out to your regional arts council. I know that St. Tammany has posted this webinar, and they are a great resource if you're in that area. If you are part of the Bayou Regional Arts Council region, that's Terrebonne, Lafourche, St. Charles, St. James, Assumption, and St. John. Please reach out to us as we are partnering with our Arts Council there, who has not been able to reach out, and for obvious reasons, power and others. So if you're there and you're listening, you can reach out to us directly. A couple of housekeeping items for today. We do have closed captions, and I'm sure if you don't see it on your screen, you can just click the CC button at the bottom of the screen, and it will show the closed caption underneath all of our conversations. We also have a Q&A button set up, so if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll get to them. Also, we'll be checking the chat. We also want you to know that we have a survey that we sent out to artists. Those surveys, I know people get tired of taking them sometimes, but they're super important because they help us direct services and resources. So if you haven't taken our survey, I know that Leah Russell will put it in the chat and in the Q&A, and so you can go there and take our survey. It is very, very helpful to us as we reach out to artists, to organizations and funders outside of the arts sector, so we can make those connections. So please feel free to do that, and we ask you to take it. Now, moving on to today's topic, we are very, very happy to be joined by CERF Plus. CERF Plus is a really fantastic organization. They were the first organization nationally that reached out to us in the 2016 floods, and since then we have done many things together. They're always super helpful. They serve artists who work in the craft discipline of visual arts by providing a safety net to support people in emergency situations and afterwards. They will tell you more about what they do, and probably better than I just did. We're really thrilled that they took the time today to help us out. You will hear from two people today. First, Cameron Baxter Lewis. He's the Director of Emergency Relief and Recovery Services, and he will talk about one aspect of the ways that CERF can help you. And then he will be followed by Carrie Cleveland, the Director of Education and Outreach. So please feel free to take notes, put your questions in the Q&A or in the chat, and we hope that this will help you out today. Without further ado, I will hand over the reins to Cameron, who will begin our webinar.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. I'm going to share my screen. You will momentarily see a dog in the mountains. Then you will see a slideshow. Does that look okay? Great. So thank you all for having me here today. I know you have a lot going on in your life right now, and genuinely I appreciate the time you've made to listen to this presentation. In the spirit of healing, I recognize the original stewards of the land that I live and work, which is Chapel Hill, North Carolina. For many generations, this has been a meeting and exchange site the indigenous populations have been connected to. This includes the Eno, the Lumbee, the Tuscarora, and the Shakori tribes. We recognize the ways indigenous people have faced violence and oppression as a result of colonialism, and we honor the elders, past and present, as well as future generations. Indigenous people are still here today, sharing their innumerable talents with the community. So Renee mentioned briefly, I'm with CERF Plus, the Artist Safety Net. We were founded in 1985 as a grassroots mutual aid organization. And essentially what would happen was at every craft fair, the artist would hear about somebody who was having a really difficult time in terms of maybe they had an illness or a car accident or some other catastrophic event that was affecting them. And they would literally pass around a hat to collect donations for that person. Fast forward to today, and we've grown into a national organization that supports craft artists and materials-based folk and traditional artists. Our goal really is to be the one-stop shop for studio-based artists on readiness information, education programs, and resources to help artists prepare for an emergency. We also advocate for the needs of artists, working with the general emergency management community and federal government to ensure their programs are including artists and other self-employed workers in all of their policies. Today, I'm here to talk about our Emergency Relief Grant Program. So I'll start with the basics. CERF Plus offers a $3,000 emergency relief grant that's intended for craft and materials-based artists that have experienced a recent unforeseen career-threatening emergency. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into those criteria in just a minute. But another important thing to note is that you have to be 18 years or older and reside in or work in the US or US territories for the past 2 years. So what is craft? That is $1 million question. We're going to look at the first paragraph of our eligibility guidelines, but there's a longer, more in-depth definition on our website, which I encourage you to check out. If I was going to ask my mother, who is a craft artist and works in stained glass, what her idea of craft is, she would probably say these materials. She would think of ceramicist or glass artist or textiles or wood or metal. So historically, that has been part of our definition, but we recognize that the world of art and the world of craft art is always changing and evolving as it should. So we try to incorporate non-traditional materials and new technologies and experimental approaches. We have a review committee that looks at all of our emergency relief inquiries, and they ask themselves questions about the work and help advise on certain components. So they might ask themselves things such as, does the applicant demonstrate that they have a career or a strong portfolio in craft art? Is there evidence of a lot of hand in their work? Meaning, do they just design the piece and then have it made somewhere else and sell it? Or are they really the ones themselves that are manipulating the material? They're doing a lot of hand work with it. So those are just a couple examples. They go through each a pretty thorough process in looking at each inquiry. We're also committed to the materials-based folk and traditional arts. And I emphasize that word materials-based again and again, because folk and traditional arts means different things to different people. Here in North Carolina, if I said folk and traditional arts, a lot of people would think of singers, which are absolutely folk and traditional art singers, but we're focused on the material-based folks. We use the National Endowment of the Arts definition of folk and traditional art, which celebrates common ethnic heritage, geographic region, religious affiliation, or occupation. And there are numerous examples of what a folk and traditional artists are. Well, one example that came to mind for me, maybe a Native American horsehair ceramic potter, which historically was created to honor a horse or celebrate a birth of a horse. And many artists who are folk and traditional may have learned this skill from their community. So maybe from somebody in their family, or maybe from somebody that's an elder in the community. So that's just one example. There are many more. So I've highlighted here a couple of the common types of emergencies that we see constituting a career-threatening one. That could include fires, floods, other natural disasters, theft, illness, etc. An important note is that the time period that the disaster occurred needs to be within a typical recovery period for that event. For example, if somebody broke their arm and that's within a year or so of the event, then they would probably qualify based on that emergency. But if they broke their arm 5 years ago and have since resumed their career and are now applying, then that might be a little too far back for that specific emergency. The examples here are not mutually exclusive. People's situations are very, very complex, and they have a lot of factors that weigh in. So I don't want to give the impression that these are the only categories we fund. These are just some of the ones we more typically see come through our program. Each case, as I said, and each emergency is unique to the person and to the individual. So therefore, we look at each of them individually. As important as it is to understand how we define an emergency, I think it's also important to talk about what we cannot consider for this program. And I very carefully word that because I don't want to say that the things on this list are not huge setbacks and potentially very difficult situations for folks. But for the intentions of this program, we don't support routine dental work. So if there's a cavity or potentially a crown that needs to be done, we would love to be there to help everyone because we know how difficult it is to get dental insurance. But unfortunately, we do have limited resources. So routine dental work would not be eligible for this program. Likewise, this is not a project-based program. Therefore, this is not something that we would be supplying a grant in order to support a project to help an artist's career. And we can't help with situations that result from a general indebtedness or lack of employment. And this is something that many artists are in right now with the COVID situation. So many folks have been without employment for a year or so and maybe have accumulated a significant amount of debt. Unfortunately, this program is not meant to support with those situations. The last statement is needless to say, but I think it's important. It's based on the individual and all of their circumstances. So again, we will look at each case very thoroughly to try to figure out exactly what's happening in that person's life. So if you're still with me and you think that you might be interested in submitting an inquiry for our emergency relief application program, it's a two-stage process. First, you would be asked to submit an inquiry, upon which we will do a general assessment to make sure that you meet the basic criteria. If you do, we would email you an invitation to the full application, in which case we'd ask for a little bit more supporting documentation that we will look at. So how would you get there? How would you submit an inquiry if you were interested? First, you'd visit our website, www.cerfplus.org. From there, you would select the Get Relief tab towards the top of the page. I apologize for the crudely drawn circle around it, but you can see it at the top of the page. A drop-down menu would appear and you would select Emergency Relief Grant Program. And this would bring you to the page in the bottom of this. And then you would circle the Inquire About Help Here section. So that would bring you to this page, and you'll see there's multiple sections broken out within it. The first is the eligibility guidelines, which again, I encourage you to check out. Next is an area where you'll look at all the supporting documents that are required for an inquiry as well as an application, which I'll go over with you right now. And the last is a frequently asked questions page. In order to submit an inquiry, we do look for a few things to help us understand your career and kind of where you are in life. The first of which is something to the effect of a resume, although I think that word can be a bit loaded, something that speaks to your career, your accomplishments, what you've done in your field or practice. We look for that as kind of the first component. After that, we look for 5 high quality photos of your art that's been created in the past 5 years. So one thing we're trying to assess is, are you a currently practicing craft artist? You know, if you had a career 15 or 20 years ago, that is a little bit different. And so we're looking for recent work, so within the past 5 years. We're also looking for a photograph of yourself in your studio or at a booth or somehow engaged in your artistic practice. And I know many artists hate that part. They don't like taking pictures of themselves. We'll also look for a publicly accessible website that demonstrates your work. And if you don't have a website, if you have a social media page, if you have any sort of media link that talks about your work, all of those would be acceptable as well. So that's what's required for the inquiry. If you're invited to apply for the full application, we're going to ask for your last 2 gross years of annual sales from your craft art. And if you are a folk and traditional artist who does not earn income from your craft art, there's a section to select that as well. And then the big thing that we're looking for in terms of an emergency is emergency supporting documentation. So if you had a theft, we'd ask for a police report. If you had an illness, we'd ask for a doctor's note and a medical bill. If you had, I don't know, if you had a fire, then we'd look for a fire report. So the emergency supporting document obviously correlates with what emergency you're applying with. An important note, as you can see on this page, the application is also fully in Spanish. So you would just click the En Español button and you receive all of this information in Spanish as well. Lastly, about the program, I'll mention we have a frequently asked questions page. Each section has a little bit more information. This is just one example I pulled up. If you were like, how long is it going to take me to get this thing? This would be within 2 weeks of receiving a complete application and all the necessary supporting documents. You would hear back from us regarding the status of your grant. I will admittedly say we are typically pretty fast at responding, but it really depends on how things are going right now. Everything's so wild with the natural disasters that we're definitely getting inundated with inquiries. So you can check out the frequently asked questions page. And now I'm going to talk about a couple of different artists who've received grants from us in the past, just so you get a sense of some of the folks we've worked with. The first is Erin Carpenter. She's a ceramic artist from Ames, Iowa. Erin's kind of one of those people who always had the gift of being an artist, but didn't realize it until a friend introduced her to a ceramics class. She was actually working at a cafe at that time. And obviously she's an amazing artist. And unfortunately what happened to Erin was she broke her arm. And she had an accident and broke her arm. So she was not able to work for about 14 weeks, which having a broken arm and being a ceramicist can be devastating. So Erin is one example of an artist we've helped. The next is Go Boardwing. This is not far away from you in New Orleans, Louisiana. Maybe some of you are familiar with her. She had a shop on Magazine Street from 2006 to 2020. And on March 17th, 2020, her entire inventory was stolen from one of her pop-up locations. And that amounted to about $50,000 worth of jewelry. And one of the things we hear from artists when they have a significant theft like this is that it's one thing to lose the dollar amount of $50,000, but what can't be replaced is the time that went into making all of those pieces. The next one's taking a second to hop over, but it'll get there. Okay. The next is Carlos Rivera. Carlos is a wood artist from Orcovas, Puerto Rico. And then in the background, you can see his home, which was devastated by Hurricane Maria. Numerous trees fell on his home as well as his studio. He has been working in wood art for 15 years, and you can kind of squint and see some of his pieces right there. I had the pleasure of visiting Carlos last year. Incredible artist, incredibly nice person, and I'm happy to say that he was able to rebuild his home and studio and is working again. And lastly, I will mention Lance Munn. Lance has been working in wood for 40 years. And for the folks who are wood nuts in the group, he worked with local hardwoods of Southern Indiana walnut, maple, and cherry. And unfortunately, in the early morning hours of August 5th in 2019, him and his partner were awoke to somebody knocking on their door. And they said, is anybody in that building next to you? And they looked, and their whole building was in flame, their whole studio. And they lost all of their work, hundreds of thousands of dollars of tools and pieces and equipment. And you can just see a complete devastating loss for a couple that was actually nearing the end of their career. They were planning to retire at some point. So this is obviously one of the more devastating examples. So those are 4, just to give you some sense of some typical artists that we've supported. I know there might be some questions, and I think I've done okay on time. So maybe I'll stop my screen share and take a moment to answer any.
We do, Cameron, thank you so much. That was really informative. We do have a question from Maida Owens, and she said, if the craft artist doesn't have internet access, is it possible for someone else to submit the inquiry? Which, of course, Arts Council, we would definitely be able to do that. Or should they contact CERF Plus directly by text or phone? If so, could you provide that?
Either way, we will do whatever it takes to get you to submit an inquiry. Working through an advocate or through somebody else is totally fine. That happens a lot. We also have a lot of artists who don't like computers and may have a daughter or a son or somebody in their family submit an inquiry on their behalf. You are also welcome to call us. We can do it over the phone. It's a little bit more difficult because we still have to get pictures of your work, but either option is totally fine.
And I guess Cameron, can you provide that phone number of
Yeah,
where
absolutely.
I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, I can definitely provide the phone number to our office, which maybe Carrie has on hand.
Yeah, Carrie just put it in the chat. So 802-229-2306. So thank you so much. Whatever other questions you may have, you certainly can put those in, continue to put those in the chat or in the Q&A. We will get to it. Just so you know, Carrie and Cameron, some of the pictures you were showing of the devastation, we are seeing firsthand. We have people with studios and houses that were destroyed by trees falling on them, and we've got significant power and wind damage, and in some cases, the cities are unrecognizable as they once were. So we're in the early stages of that, but we know that, in fact, the new question that's being asked as we're doing this shelter work is, do you have Verizon or do you have AT&T? Because that can mean the difference in access. And so we're trying to share, just because towers were downed and those types of things. So it's good to know that there's a phone number also where they can call. And again, we'll put our contact information for the Arts Council in that chat as well. Carrie, I would like to go ahead and move on to you.
I have one quick thing to say. I'm sorry. I saw a quick question about emergency supporting documentation regarding Ida. And we have changed this, I think, in a positive way in the past few weeks. Typically, when there was a natural disaster, we looked for some sort of official assessment that there was damage to the home, but we recognized with the delay of getting folks to go out and do the damage assessments and all of the things that can happen after emergency, it was somewhat impractical. So we will also accept photos of the damage as well as an invoice or even an insurance claim, whether it's paid or unpaid, as proof of the emergency. So we're trying to work with you. We know you're in the midst of a crisis and don't want to stress you out with this piece. So Even if you don't have everything together, I think I would encourage you just go ahead and get the ball rolling and submit the inquiry, and then we can have conversations with you about what documentation is available.
And Cameron, I just have one follow-up question. If people are applying for FEMA relief, does that negate CERF?
No.
Okay.
No, absolutely not. And we encourage you to apply for anything you can get from FEMA. Absolutely.
All right, great. Thank you.
Sure.
Let me see if there's a couple more. I just want to make sure we've covered it before we move on. My screen is taking its time. We are going to get to those questions as soon as I can access them, but in the interest of time, Carrie Cleveland, I would love for you to go ahead and begin giving us your expertise. And thank you, Cameron, so much. It was super helpful. We'll continue with those questions. If I didn't get to your question, I will be getting to it momentarily. And I think, Cameron, you'll still be on the call, right? Or on the webinar.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks. All right, Carrie, take it away.
Thank you so much, Renee, and Misty and everyone at the council for putting together this opportunity. I want to thank you all who are here participating with everything going on, that you're taking the time to be here today. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to take a moment to do the screen sharing dance, so bear with me for just a second. And again, I'm Carrie Cleveland. I am the Director of Education Outreach here at CERF Plus. And I want to take a moment to recognize the people who had stewarded and continue to reside and steward in the land where CERF Plus's main office and where I live. And I acknowledge the Abenaki and the Wabanaki Confederacy, whose unceded lands from which I'm presenting are currently called Montpelier, Vermont. And I want to honor the past and current and future work and craft of the Indigenous people of this land and the vital role that it plays and holds within the craft field. So today, what I'm going to talk about are three main components. I want to talk about steps for studio cleanup and salvage. There's a lot of information there, so I'm going to keep to pretty high level points, but throughout all of those, I'll give you places where you can jump further to get more information that might be more relevant to your particular situation. And I'll take a moment to note here that while CERF Plus's emergency relief funds are really rooted in artists working in craft disciplines, our emergency recovery and resources, et cetera, are more broadly applicable to studio-based artists and beyond. So this will cover a broad swath of different artists, different media, different situations. Then I want to touch a bit on accessing federal relief. We have a peer organization called NCAPER, National Coalition for Arts Preparedness and Emergency Response, that's recently put together a fantastic publication on accessing federal relief. So I've pulled some high level pieces from that to how to get the ball rolling, how to get moving. So I'll touch on some of those. And again, I've provided within this links to where you can get more information. And I'm happy after this presentation to pull together a doc that summarizes all of those links so you can have those in one place to move further. And then lastly, because I know so many of you are dealing with water damage as a result from Ida, CERF Plus produced a video on salvaging mold damaged artwork. So time permitting, I'd love to be able to share that with you because it was produced with a conservator named MJ Davis, who does a great job of sharing out some tips and ways that you can try to salvage work where water damage is creeping in and causing mold. So let's go dive in to how to kind of get started with thinking about some of the studio salvage and cleanup pieces you might be facing. The first question you really want to ask yourself in assessing this is it safe? You at first, just from the very beginning, keep everyone's safety in mind. Yours, that of any family or helpers who might be helping you. And then, off limits, if a facility or building, or studio space, home, if it's been designated off limits by emergency authorities, please just remember to take the time needed to enter spaces when they're actually deemed safe because they might be structurally unsound at this point. I want to point out health considerations, especially when damaging or entering damaged areas. You know, if you don't have an up-to-date tetanus vaccine, please don't go into damaged areas. And also thinking about any hazardous materials you might be encountering, whether from the disaster itself or maybe substances within your studio. So think through that as you're thinking about going back into a space. Are there chemical risks that you might be facing? And what are they entirely prohibitive, or does it just mean that there are additional protective gear considerations that you might have? And then also just thinking about, and broadly, contamination throughout the area and any other health or safety concerns. So first step, determine whether you can even start to go into a space. And then some do's when you're getting started and assessing things. Wear protective gear at all times. Some examples of what that might mean for you. Boots, whether the rubber, leather, safety-toed boots, having gloves, disposable latex ones or nitrile or rubber or leather gloves, or having a hard hat, having a respirator or at least respiratory mask. Outside of the COVID year, as we're all much more comfortable and familiar with wearing masks at this point. As applicable, think about maybe having some kind of disposable overalls or Tyvek suit going into especially really damaged spots, or plastic aprons, having protective eyewear, splash-proof goggles, or bandana, having some kind of communication device with you, making sure that you have a way to reach out to other people. One I think is really pertinent, especially for you all, having a stick to lift debris. Just, snakes, animals get displaced during emergencies as you're starting to evaluate space that has a lot of damage. You don't go to lift up that thing yourself. Just have something to lift up the debris first. Make sure there's no critter lurking there underneath for you. And checking for both electrical damage and gas leaks. If you have the capacity to turn off your electricity at the main switch, if you can do that without risk. And checking for gas leaks. If you smell gas or hear blowing up or kind of hissing sounds, and you're in a space, open that window and then leave immediately. If you're able to safely, you can turn off the main gas valve from outside, or call the gas company. And just note that if that main gas valve has been turned off, you will need the gas company to turn it back on. And then taking care of yourself and others, and in addition to making sure it's safe for everyone, as you're going forward, avoiding prolonged exposure to heat and humidity. I know that's really hard right now, but just take care of yourself. Stop, drink plenty of water, at least 1 gallon per person per day, and take frequent breaks. Set up a rest area with a first aid station. If you're able to, an eye wash kit, some sanitary supplies, and drinking water in cups. And if health problems develop, just stop working immediately and seek medical attention, and just keep tuned into emergency radio stations for updates as you go. And then from the do's, go into some don'ts. Don't take everything on at once. You can't do this all at once. In addition to thinking about stopping, taking breaks, know that this is going to take time. Just remind yourself. I know that we all have that instinct to just push and push and push and want to get done and get forward. But remember, this is going to take time, and that's okay. Don't enter a space alone or work alone. Make sure someone else is around, someone else knows what you're doing. Don't work with mold unless you know that it's okay and safe to do so. And don't work with mold without protective gear. And another just big one, don't use generators inside. And so then moving on from there, from kind of some of those basic do's and don'ts, the steps to think about in salvaging your art studio. Start by making a list of priorities. And here's some guidelines for you to think about in doing that. Focus on the general categories of your studio's contents, the art, the assets, the archives, rather than the details of particular items. Assess which career-related and business records, for example, are most vital and which are duplicated elsewhere. What tools and equipment are most essential to resuming your work, what can be replaced or easily repaired, and evaluate the monetary value of artwork, yours and others, and sentimental value as well. And for resources needed, figure out how many volunteers you might need, any specialized skills that might be helpful as you're starting to work on salvaging your studio, and lining up people who might be able to help, you know, figuring out areas where you might need some professional attention as soon as possible, and you know, try to set up a dry, secure area with access to clean water for any salvage operations. If you don't have a dry space available, try to protect items with some plastic sheeting, and then try to assemble and triage supplies and equipment. So working from there, and then reviewing safety precautions with anyone helping you with your work, you know, thinking about that protective gear, making sure that anyone who's helping you might have access to it too, and moving and handling guidelines. So things like handling art objects as little as possible, unless absolutely necessary. When moving heavy textiles, for example, providing physical supports to them, such as a rigid board or a heavy sling, and leaving delicate wet fabrics folded and not stacking them. And then looking at general triage guidelines and salvage priorities with anyone who is helping you. You know, leave undamaged items in place if possible, isolating contaminated items and unsalvageable ones, materials, and arranging safe disposal as soon as you can. Just don't dispose of anything that's toxic or contaminated by putting it in the trash or pouring it down a drain. You know, separate wet from damp and dry items, separating out moldy items, and separating damaged from undamaged items, and separating out coated paper or based materials. And so from here, I want to talk a little bit about that FEMA resource that I referenced earlier. Again, this is put together by an organization that goes by the acronym NCAPER. As with previous slides, I have the information here where you can get more. So I've pulled out some of the top level pieces, and I focused for this presentation just thinking about kind of immediate needs, housing assistance. And the housing assistance offered by FEMA, it's intended to cover costs that aren't covered by insurance. And it covers a couple different areas within housing. There's temporary housing assistance, and that's financial assistance for homeowners or renters to rent a temporary place to live if your home is unlivable because of the disaster, because of Ida. If there are no rental properties available as a last resort, FEMA may provide a housing unit, such as a mobile home, a travel trailer, or an apartment for your temporary housing needs. Other type is permanent housing construction. This is direct or financial assistance to homeowners for the construction or repair of a home. This type of help occurs only in certain unique cases where no other type of housing assistance is possible. There's lodging expense reimbursement, again, homeowners or renters for periods of time when your home is unlivable or inaccessible based on the disaster, or if one of your major utilities like water or sewer, electricity or gas isn't functional due to the disaster. And then home repair, financial assistance for home repairs and home replacement. Again, it's kind of in the name. It's financial assistance to replace your home if it was destroyed by the disaster. To register, to begin that process, FEMA has set up through their website at disasterassistance.gov. There's also a FEMA mobile app, and I've included the 800 number here. And then you can also start the process at a disaster recovery center. And then once you apply for assistance, FEMA's going to verify your losses to determine if you're eligible. They might do that by sending an inspector or use technologies such as they say geospatial inspections, or by reviewing documentation that you provide. If you have insurance, FEMA may only provide assistance if your needs are not met by your insurance company. And then just a really important note, FEMA inspections are always free. Do not pay a fee for someone to inspect your damages. I know that there can be a lot of scams that pop up after emergencies, so just having that on your attention. And if you're eligible, FEMA can provide funds to you either via check or electronic funds transfer. And so next, cover some of the information that FEMA will ask for as you're getting set up and applying for assistance. They'll want either your social security number or the social security number, and this is their language, of a minor child in the household who is a US citizen, non-citizen national, or qualified alien. They'll want to know your total annual household income before taxes. And they'll need contact information for you, your phone number, your mailing address, and email address and damaged home address, understanding that where you are now might not be the residence due to the emergency. They'll ask about any insurance information you have, and then that bank account information so that if you are deemed eligible, they can provide that funding. And then just a couple tips. The application deadline is for FEMA, it's within 60 days of the presidential declaration. And for documentation, take photos of your damages and keep all the receipts associated with your expenses from the disaster. That's also a good tip too for insurance claims as well. So that is the end of the slides that I want to run through. But with the time that we have, I want to hop out of this presentation and share with you that mold video because I think that you'll find a lot of that really helpful. So again, bear with me while I do a little screen dance. You would think that after a year and a half of Zoom, we'd be old hat at it by now, but still always a little bit of, like I said, a dance. So I'm going to reshare my screen now that I have the video up and we're out of the PowerPoint. And oh, actually, stop sharing for one moment. Like I said, we've been doing this for a year, but still a little bit of a dance. And we should be good. And
if your art is water damaged, there is a threat of mold. It may be possible to salvage your artwork, so please don't immediately throw anything away. Hi, I'm MJ Davis. I'm an art conservator, and I'm here today to prevent your emergency from becoming a disaster. You have about 48 hours before mold will occur. You should never go into any kind of a compromised space by yourself. A successful salvage is one that has been well planned, and you need to protect yourself. Wear personal protective equipment, do a damage assessment, document the damage that has occurred, make a plan of attack. Separate all the artworks by condition. Remove undamaged work and create a triage area. You'll need table space and supplies for drying. In this two-part video, I'm going to show you how to prevent or lessen mold damage on your artwork. First, how to dry out mold, then basic techniques for removing it. What do you do with your wet, moldy stuff? You need to dry the mold out. You have two choices. You can air dry things, or you can freeze them. Freezing will deactivate the mold. It won't get rid of it, but it will slow it down from eating and destroying your artwork. You take your artwork and interleave it with wax paper. Very carefully lifting it, because when paper gets wet, it gets a little heavier and it can be more sensitive to tearing. So I usually like to try and lift by the corners diagonally, and interleafing as I go. And then you can put all of this into a plastic bag so that it protects it from other items that might be clean in your freezer. Tape it up, and now it's ready to put into the freezer. Freezing your artwork allows you to bring things out of the freezer in small batches so that you can then utilize your flat space and work on your artwork at a slower pace when you have more time and when you're not so emotionally upset. It's important to control the humidity in the workspace. Run a dehumidifier and make sure the air circulates. Use a box fan, place it in a window so that it is actively sucking air out of the room. Another fan on the other side of the room that's pulling in fresh air. Ideally, you want to try and get to 45% relative humidity, and that will help reduce the mold bloom. Air drying paper and photographs is fairly simple. You need lots of flat space with your absorbent materials on top. You can let them air dry on top of towels and paper, changing them frequently. Or another great way to save space is to put them on some kind of a screen. You could use the window screens from your house. If you have racks in your studio, you could use those for air drying as well. Another method for air drying is clipping the corner of the paper to the clothesline to air dry. This will maximize your air drying space. Air drying paintings. If the painting is slightly damp, air dry it face up. Raise them up onto the supports so that you have airflow, so that the air will pass over the back and slowly dry the back out as well. If the painting is very wet or moldy, flip it and air dry face down. If a lot of your paintings have been water damaged and have mold on them, I would highly recommend that you consult a paintings conservator to just simply help you with the protocol of moving forward. When textiles get wet and moldy, they're going to be very heavy, possibly fragile, and hard to handle. So it's always good to have some kind of a support underneath that textile when you're transporting it to air dry it. You would bring it up next to your screen and then very carefully move it over onto your screen for drying. Different types of materials take different lengths of time. Paper will take maybe a day. A thick textile will take 2 to 3 days. Test the paper's dryness with the back of your hand. And if it feels cool, then it's probably not quite dry. Once it feels not cool, then you're all done. Now it's time to get off the dried mold. A vacuum cleaner that has a HEPA filter is necessary because a vacuum that doesn't have it will blow the mold spores back out into the room. This is simply fiberglass window screening, which you can buy at the hardware store. And we're going to use it as a separator between the artwork and the head of the vacuum like this. So for paper, the technique is to move the head of the vacuum like this. You can further reduce the mold by using a natural bristled brush and brushing into the nozzle of the vacuum. Never directly put the vacuum onto the artwork. Textiles, again, we're going to use fiberglass screening, so it's going to be a similar motion as we used with paper, the pouncing. Wash the screening, vacuum brush, and other hand tools in warm, soapy water to remove any mold spores. This will prevent cross-contamination. Here are gentle surface cleaning methods to remove any remaining mold. And you can do this with eraser crumbs. This is a vinyl eraser, and this is a ginger grater. Gently massage the crumbs over the surface of the paper, picking up any little bits that might be there, and then simply removing them by dusting it off after you're done. Another method is to use a kneaded eraser. Form a point to precisely dab the artwork and pick up the specks of mold. Make new points frequently and discard the eraser when finished. Mineral spirits can be effective at reducing mold from finished wooden surfaces. such as frames, furniture, and sculpture. First test an inconspicuous area and let it dry. If the mineral spirits do not harm the finish, carefully continue with your cleaning. You don't have to have a total loss. The things that you will do step by step will make a difference.
You have to just continue using those things that propel you forward as an artist to propel you through the process of conservation. You just have to be brave, take a deep breath, and just go for it, because it will work. It does work.
Thank you for taking the time to watch that. And I hope you found some tips in that are going to be helpful to you as you work to rebuild and salvage your studio and keep moving forward. And I'm happy to share any additional links or reshare any of those in the presentation so you can dive in further. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now talking from a different source since my computer had some issues, but that was really, really great information. I know that we had a question about whether we're posting this on our website, and we will be doing so. So if you go to artsvr.org and to Creative Relief under Natural Disasters, you will see this video link, and we'll keep it online and also share it with our other regional arts council partners, especially those in the affected areas. I know that you guys answered a lot of questions between the video and the presentation, but that it was a lot of information to take in. So those of you who are listening in today, I know you also were dealing with a lot in your personal life, and it's a very emotional time. So know that this resource will be there for you. The phone numbers are there for you as well. And we will continue posting about these subject matters and other resources that we find that may be helpful to you. Please remember also to take the survey, because that helps us with information from you so that we can direct those resources as well. And I would say with that, I just want to really thank CERF Plus for the work that you do all over the United States, and always in times when we have needed you and need you now. So we're grateful. We thank you, and we look forward to chatting with you whether or not there's an emergency in the future. Thank you so much. And people listening today, feel free to follow up with us by email at info@artsvr.org or by calling us at 225-344-8558. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
So much for having us.
Thank you.